Hello, friends. Patrick MacFarlane here with the big 5-0. This is episode 50 officially of the Liberty Weekly podcast. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing Keith Knight of Keith Knight's Don't Tread on Anyone, here to discuss how to be a good advocate for liberty. Keith Knight, you want to tell everyone a little bit about your channel on YouTube?
Yes, so I started a channel a couple years ago and only put out a few videos and then did nothing with it for a while. And then I started reading books and underlining the important parts. I then started recording the most important parts of those books into 30-second to 2-minute segments in order to just plant the seed in people's mind and briefly give descriptions, because honestly, the point of living in a free society, eventually once we get there, which I believe we will, is to enjoy the finer things in life. And I really want people to enjoy the finer things in their life and not have to delve into this garbage because it's so depressing. I mean, God, just Google U.S. foreign policy Yemen, and you'll just go a day without eating, just reading articles. So it's depressing as it is. I want to create a short time span where you can hold their attention and you can communicate very important information. Not a lot of people want to read human action, but you can underline the most important paragraph in each chapter and make short videos to communicate to a much larger audience. I think that's how we're going to win.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that, because I wanted to talk about, we'll get into this later, but I wanted to talk about what I see, my little ideas that I have about how I see the liberty movement is that I see each of us kind of having a role. And for me, Larken Rose is the talking to status person. You know, he's the person that will sit down and speak in comforting language and can really break that ice. And I think maybe through what you've said, you would identify a little bit with that role. What do you think?
Absolutely. You know, Ernie Hancock, who lives in Phoenix here, he always likes to say there's no central plan for advocating libertarianism or voluntarism, and that's so true. I think we need Adam Kokesh man on the street videos. We need Stefan Molyneux hours-long videos explaining individual topics. I think we need that. I think we need Larken Rose. I think we need people like Roderick Long, who wrote a great article, 10 Common Objections to Anarchism. So just like the gun control argument, I think is the best way to sort of explain. There's so many different ways of explaining something so simple. Like some people might say, well, I think the histories of governments show that power tends to centralize, power corrupts, therefore maybe those people shouldn't have all the guns. You have another way of saying, the state does not have the right to monopolize any weaponry. Another way of saying it is, when you say gun control, you advocate for the state and their friends to have all the guns. And then there is the fifth way or fourth way, the Mark Passio way of, there is no debate. I'm not going to have a debate. I'm just going to ask you, are you going to take my guns from me, yes or no? If so, you will be met with resistance. That includes any agents of the state.
Yeah.
Those are all different ways to attract different people while all getting the same principle, the non-aggression principle message across to so many people.
Yeah, that's such a good point. You know, and that kind of reminds me of what Ron Paul says, which is, you know, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You know, do what you want to do. What do you want to do to advocate liberty? And that's the whole point, you know. Just like the way the market works, we can't dictate to whom, you know, what their role should be in the movement or anything like that. You know, but so to kind of go into the greatest or the most dangerous superstition, I'm just gonna throw something at you. So one thing that we talked about before we went on was talking about deprogramming the language and about George Orwell and how the state has kind of controlled the language to put things in your mind without you even thinking about it. Certain concepts like public servant. That's one of my favorite ones. What do you think about that?
So controlling of the language, or Orwell calls it newspeak in 1984, is so important because they can take words And just by getting to associate certain things with different words, people will form their life philosophies on those words. For example, the fact that people have been told to fear the word anarchism, but not the word government or the state is just pure mind control. When they say anarchy means chaos, the vast majority of your interactions are anarchic, totally voluntary interactions, but people are taught to fear that. So simply by using words and associating those words with things, you can change the way people operate. It's important because when you say something like, should we have taxes? It's such a loaded statement. Or when Brett Weinstein, idiot, says, would that work? He said, would deregulation work? What do you mean work? Did slavery work? Yeah, for a lot of slave owners. Does theft work? Yeah, for a lot of thieves. Does rape work? Yeah, for a lot of rapists and immoral people. When you use loaded terms, you're not able to really narrowly focus on what the problem is. So instead of saying, should we have taxes? What I think a more effective approach is do you have the right to forcibly take property from another person? Now, people think of money and property as different things for some reason, but they aren't. But instead of using words like should government, ask, does a group of people, because government is simply just a group of people, but for some reason or another, people grant them rights that no other group has. Now, by calling government a group, you're delegitimizing all the legitimacy that people perceive the government as having. Government has the right to A, B, C, X, Y, Z. No, let's just talk about a group. Let's call the group the Keith and Patrick group. Do they have the right to do X? Well, does government have the right to? What's the difference between these two groups? And then by putting them on a level playing field, calling them both groups, see what the moral difference is. Well, government's totally different because we vote. So if Keith and Patrick's group allowed you to vote on who the CEO of the group should be every 4 years, would the Keith and Patrick group then have the right to tax you, regulate you, put you in jail for not obeying certain laws that the Keith and Patrick group wrote down? So simply by tapping into language and not using loaded words, actually saying what they mean, not gun control, victim violent disarmament, those ways are much more effective at explaining what you mean.
Yeah, and I jumped in with my favorite, public servant. So just to touch on that, I mean, to get into the whole bit about, government not producing anything and taking everything that it has forcibly or under the threat of force through duress, my thing is like, okay, so does that mean that a business owner who doesn't sell someone a car is not somehow serving them? Like at least the guy selling you the car won't, come to your house if you don't want to buy it, and
okay, let's grant someone is a public servant. Dave Rubin, for example, I think is a great public servant. All his stuff is free. He doesn't have ads. Dave Rubin, I love you. You don't have the right to tax me. You don't have the right to initiate violence against me or write down words on paper that I have to obey or you're going to cage me. But that again is something, it's like someone has given their life to the state. It's almost like it's the legitimacy of self-sacrifice is really what that gets into. I'm not in it for myself like an entrepreneur. I'm in it for the people.
Yeah.
you are not in it for the people if you are funded coercively. You're just not. You're not in a marriage for the woman if she's kidnapped and chained to a pole in your basement. Just by definition. You don't even have to get into individual examples. So yeah, public servant is the perfect example of a completely loaded term that not only doesn't mean what it's intended to mean, it means the exact opposite of what it really is.
Yeah, and that's how they get you. They by using language And I forget what this is called, but it reminds me of a certain thing like Lost in Translation, where there's certain things in different languages you just cannot convey the same meaning because the whole concept of how it forms. And I hope you can remember, it's the whirl effect, or it starts with a W. They talked about this. This is what that movie, that the most recent Alien, like an Alien movie, was about. But it's just the idea, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is what it's called, is the idea that languages they create a different thought in your head. And what is so sinister about using language in this way is that it really does control your very thoughts. And one thing I appreciate about Larken Rose in The Greatest Superstition, or The Most Dangerous Superstition, is how he really works to get on people's level. And I think this is what his skill set is. And maybe you could say that Larken Rose is more of like a left individual, where he comes at it with a lot of empathy and can really connect with people. But what I see is him making that effort, to call it putting in people in cages, stuff like that. And that is present, throughout the book. What do you think about that?
Oh yeah, I love how Larken Rose is. It's like you have the Rothbardian, very intellectual 300-page introduction to liberty, a 1,000-page Man, Economy, and State. You have it at such a much more real personal level with Larken Rose, which is why I really appreciate his work. I got his book right here. It's such an important read. It really lays out the arguments against statism in such a logical way. I mean, I remember I was sort of getting onto this. There was a trip that I took with my high school class to Europe, and we went to the Vatican, and there were 30 of us on the trip. And this girl said, "Ha ha ha! I can't believe people think the Pope just is like some magical person. Like, if I put on a weird hat, would like people come to me and ask me for my confessions?" And I'm like, no, what you do is put on a suit and call yourself president, and then you'd have these magical powers to do things no one else has. And everyone looked at me like I shanked one of the chaperones. Like I was just there to ruin everyone's time and bring up politics. Meanwhile, first of all, we're on a rather educational trip. Second of all, she said she has a blatant contradiction in her thinking. But it's so difficult. But there's so many opportunities to call out such a blatant inconsistency like statism. I mean, I'd like to call her now and just ask her, hey, if you got to vote for a pope once every 4 years, could the Catholic Church force you not to tax, but to tithe? They'd force you to tithe. And then obviously we need priests to regulate us, or else there would just be terrible immorality and Satanism everywhere. Well, we need a Bible, or else there wouldn't be any laws. So it's so inconsistent that there's so many opportunities to expose the state's immorality and inconsistency, and that book just does an excellent job of doing so.
Well, and that's because normal people can't be bothered with these uncomfortable thoughts, And I wanted to talk about this too, because I have a similar, story like that, because when I was talking to a friend of mine in law school who is a tax attorney, or is going to be a tax attorney, and was on this some contest that they had, and she won it, and she is super smart. And we were talking, and I said, so tax attorney, eh? So if a good definition of slavery is taking 100% of the proceeds from someone's labor, then what do you call it when someone takes 60% of someone's labor? At what point does it become slavery? And yeah, she didn't really have an answer for that. She didn't want to think about it, and so I changed the subject. But yeah.
Well, thinking of yourself as someone who's been fooled, not like, oh, I thought this was better than this team was better than that team. Oh, I was fooled. Or Penn and Teller played a magic trick on me. I was fooled. When you're telling someone, hey, you've been fooled and you bought into a lie since you were like 6, it's very difficult to grasp. I mean, My grandma likes to talk about, how she would literally rather die than be under the rule of Hitler or Stalin, who has never taken a dime out of her pocket or forced anything on her. Yet the US government, she's perfectly fine with. The one group that promises to cage her for not obeying their rules and funding their extravagant, flamboyant measures, that's the group she's totally okay with. But for some other reason, she's just so terrified of all the other mafias, but the one mafia extorting her, she's like, yeah, that's here for me.
And that's the cognitive dissonance for you, you know. So when you start out from a kid and being imbued with this propaganda and sitting through it and, you know, reciting the Pledge of Allegiance and everything like that, why don't you talk a little bit about your coming to liberty? Because for me, taking that final step and becoming an anarchist and saying, you know what, no, it's never okay. I'm not going to be a pragmatist. I'm going to be an ideologue because reasons. But it feels naughty, doesn't it? Like I still when I'm talking to people within our sphere, because I've made a lot of friends through the podcast now, and I just got together with Trey from the Subversion webcast in person because he lives close to me, and he was talking about being anti-state, and I just got this shiver up my spine, being like, this is naughty, you know, this is bad. And why don't you tell a little bit about your coming to liberty? Because we already had episode 47 of the podcast where we spoke, but the whole time you were playing devil's advocate and you were saying these awful statist things. And so why don't you talk, that's Liberty Weekly /47 for that show. But why don't you talk a little bit about your coming to liberty?
So I forget what year, I guess it must have been 2007, 2008. I was 12, and my dad had gotten me into supporting Barack Obama, as did my mom, sort of, but mainly my dad and his parents. We'd go up there and they would talk about politics, and I would sort of catch on. Long story short, I ended up going to the Obama headquarters in Phoenix, Arizona. Not the headquarters, but the headquarters that was in Phoenix. I was talking to people there. I got really interested. I went to Washington, D.C., and he got the nomination that day, which is like Pope Francis getting the crown. It was so good. So I bought a newspaper and I held it up in front of the White House, and I was just so interested. And then I started watching Sean Hannity's show to say, my dad hates this guy. Let me, this guy's so blatantly evil. Let's see what it's about. Long story short, I was convinced of the conservative position because I felt working for things and achieving things through charity rather than welfare was a superior way to have a society. From then I went on to Bill O'Reilly's show. I thought he made some more sense. And then I went on to Glenn Beck's show. And these are like six-month increments, but Glenn Beck's show really got me into looking into the possibility that conspiracies exist, that libertarianism is a superior philosophy to conservatism, and then Ron Paul's arguments against foreign policy. There were so many times I heard Ron Paul say things that I just went, I cannot be one of these idiot libertarians. They don't even believe in the minimum wage. And then I'd hear, someone like Thomas Sowell or Milton Friedman say, yeah, the minimum wage is bad. Big companies can afford to comply with it. Smaller companies can't. That leads to oligopolies and monopolies. It also hurts people with the least amount of skills and the least amount of experience. So it's really hard for them to get a foot in the door. And I'm like, that just blew my mind. You just blew my mind. I've been in school for 12 years and I've never heard that. And then I've said, okay, but I can't get on board with this idiotic foreign policy of let people invade us and never do anything in return. Little did I know I was blaming the rain on my umbrella by saying, when you invade countries, they are likely to retaliate. That principle you can even take back to the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, where absolute interventionist policies on behalf of the what were later the Allies really put by taking so much land from Germany and putting them in debt till the 1980s, it was so blatantly unfair and unrealistic that it was clearly an attempt to get them into war for a second time. Now, then you start looking into things like 9/11, an absolute false flag attack. I've mentioned books for The New Pearl Harbor by David Ray Griffin, Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World by Christopher Bolin, and Synthetic Terror by Webster Tarpley. Those three books absolutely lay out the case 9/11 was a false flag attack by the CIA and the Israeli Mossad. And the history of false flags also brought me into saying, okay, this is possible. Are other things possible that I never considered? And reading the works of Larken Rose, watching the videos of Stefan Molyneux, hearing the interviews by Adam Kokesh made me recognize the moral and economic legitimacy of anarcho-capitalism. In short, I became an anarcho-capitalist voluntarist when I ran out of excuses of when initiating violence is okay. So if you can ignore my 5-minute annoying answer, that wasn't that interesting, even though I thought it was. That is my 5-second answer.
No, that was not. That was a great answer. That's what I wanted, man. Yeah, that it's interesting because you took the opposite path from me. Even though, so in 2008, I was a freshman in high school, and I didn't know anything about anything, and I thought Barack Obama was cool and young and black, and he was hip, first black president, that kind of thing. And then I still had, my values of what I didn't know at the time were conservatism. And then I've always been a classical liberal, even through that thinking Obama was cool part. And so that kind of developed. And then in college, I've told this story a lot on the podcast, so I'm going to gloss over it. But in college, I, ran into Ron Paul in the actually 2012 campaign. I ran into him. And so I got caught up with that, and I started reading. And then my co-host Jerry, and we met, and he convinced me, and then we parted, and then I started reading Rothbard and all that stuff, and I came back a full-fledged ANCAP. But I came to the point, my point being, is that I came to the point of this philosophy before going down the conspiracy rabbit hole. And it's so strange to me that you took the opposite path, because for me, the conspiracy rabbit hole somehow was a little bit more taboo than being an anarchist. So do you think that being an anarchist and the conspiracy rabbit hole are interrelated somehow?
It really makes me think that, or it sort of scares me that that maybe I'm just trying to be a contrarian, that like I was sort of isolated with some of my views. So I just said, screw everyone. All of my views are going to be isolated. I really hope that that's not something I'm suffering from. But the more I look into official stories, of course, the victors write the history books. I had never heard about the Treaty of Versailles until I was just Googling on my own, just researching. The explanation was World War I, World War II, caused by Germany.
Yeah.
Nothing else happened. Do you want to explain that anymore? One day, America was senselessly attacked by Japan for no reason. Well, how about the Export Control Act of 1940, which froze all Japanese assets? Don't you know sanctions are an act of war? At the end of our last discussion, we talked about Madeleine Albright saying 500,000 dead Iraqi children were a completely justified response to the possibility of Saddam Hussein having weapons of mass destruction. Speaking of which, there's really only one country that's used 2 weapons of mass destruction, and they've been on civilians both times. I think I know the name of that country, but that was never discussed. Never. So when you see that, hold on, there is so much information that's so readily available. Operation Paperclip, Gulf of Tonkin, the Nyaria testimony, babies in incubators lie. Maybe I can open my mind to other things. Maybe I'm so wrong about something I was so confident about. Bin Laden attacked us out of nowhere. Well, actually, one Google search shows you him and the National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, training one another in an operation called Operation Cyclone under Jimmy Carter in 1979. Zbigniew Brzezinski said, hey, this is our chance to give the Soviet Union their Vietnam War. And you can read about that in Scott Horton's book, Fool's Errand. But yes, I think they're interrelated, because once you open your mind in one area, you realize, could I have been deceived in other areas? And opening your mind in both those sectors allows you to reap the great benefits of truth.
So do you ever, and this is kind of what I wanted to get into, is that, because I don't, but do you ever worry that, what if I'm wrong about this anarcho-capitalism thing? Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that all the time, but then I think through it again, and I'm like, no, how could it be wrong? You know, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. I just don't see, you know, that being wrong.
Well, it is absolutely difficult, because you are advocating something that's so different. It's so different yet so the same.
Yeah.
Like if you just take America, we hold everyone to the non-aggression principle standards, except this little group called the Congress group and the police group. And they're called the government group, which is why they're magic. So it's so simple, yet so different, because that legitimacy we irrationally grant them is so destructive. So it's so different yet so the same that it's just hard to explain. And irrationality needs constant reinforcement. So every day CNN has to talk about how legitimate state intervention is. What should taxes be? Not, is taxation morally justified? What should how should these companies be regulated? When is it okay to invade a country? Are you assuming that a coercively funded, monopolized military is morally justified? It's all these things that it's like our ANCAP life, and then all around us is statism. So when you're working on the Underground Railroad, it feels dirty because it's not popular. You spend all your day, well, slavery's necessary. We can't just free them all. They have no job skills. They'd steal. They're disproportionately going to spread diseases. They have no knowledge in any industry. So no one has to work. What if no one built anything? We need slavery. It's so different than everything else that it's so hard to imagine, because we're not constantly getting it advocated at us like statism is. So yes, I do have my doubts, but every time I have my doubts, I remember that I don't have the right to initiate violence. Therefore, I don't have the right to vote for someone to do it on my behalf.
Yeah, it just, I don't know. Every time I rethink it, it just makes so much more sense, you know. But I'm glad that you touched on the slavery part again, because and bringing this back to what the title is how to be a good advocate for liberty, and to be humble about it. You know, I'm figuring this question out. I don't have all the answers, you know. I do, like what Ron Paul says, I know what I can do, and I do it, I guess. And I'm not perfect at that. But what I really see us as being, and Dave Smith has said this before, so if anyone goes off on it, blame Dave Smith. But I do kind of see us as the modern day abolitionists. You know, if slavery had existed for thousands of years, and you were one to say, hey, this is wrong, back in, you know, 1820, I think people were thinking about it. Maybe some classical liberals were thinking about the contradiction in logic, but I really just do see that, you know, we're trying to set people free, and I don't see how that could be a bad thing, you know. But yeah, take that.
Well, it sounds like people laugh when I say, when they go, oh, that opinion isn't popular. I go, well, abolitionism wasn't popular. And they go, oh my God, did you seriously, just like, you complain about some taxes and technicalities? Are you seriously comparing yourself to an abolitionist? And I said, absolutely I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. I said, so what was so bad about slavery? And eventually you'll get the immediate, it's immoral to force someone to work for you. I said, well, how is the draft any different? More people died being enslaved into that draft based on the Gulf of Tonkin lie. And not just in Vietnam, in Korea, in World War II, in the First World War, in the Spanish-American War, in the Civil War. Those were slaves. That was absolutely slavery. Now, what's bad about slavery? Well, it basically ruins someone's life. They're mistreated and they don't have the right to pursue their own objectives. Okay. That applies to every single person who's been put in a cage for this goddamn immoral drug war, to the Eric Garners of the world who haven't paid cigarette taxes and were told they were resisting, screaming, "I can't breathe." You think that's a lone video? That is what happens to every person who does not pay. And you're telling me taxation isn't theft? You're out of your mind. Look at the number of lives. Okay, slavery ruins the lives of groups. Look at the number of lives ruined by governments. And you're going to tell me what I'm opposing is not equally immoral to slavery. The bombing of Dresden, Leipzig, Hamburg, that's Germany in 1 year by the Allies. The bombing of London.
And those are white people.
I know, really.
Yeah.
No wonder they don't get mentioned.
Yeah.
Mao's China, Stalin's Russia, Pol Pot's Cambodia. Are you telling me I'm not advocating a solution to the most evil thing that's ever existed? Yes. Calling ourselves abolitionists is not only in principle the same, but in utilitarian terms, exactly a perfect analogy.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And but there is the recoil, it seems grandiose because what I eventually want to get at is being humble and trying to be a paragon when you try and advocate the ideas of liberty to normies. And it can get so frustrating because we're so different. And we have these truths, but they're good. Come take a look, guys. Come take a look. I discovered the truth of, I guess the universe or the world or the human condition. And it really does feel that way. And I don't mean to, because that's such a bold statement, but so in advocating liberty, trying to be a paragon, because what the major point that I wanted to drive is that I feel like ANCAPs and voluntarists spend too much time trying to win arguments and not enough time trying to convince people, because those are two different things. They're two different things. And I don't know how many Facebook arguments or Twitter arguments you get into. I don't anymore because I have my podcast and my videos that I'm doing. But do you have a lot of it? Do you do social media arguments anymore?
So sometimes I will, depending on the person and depending on what comes to mind. So I will take the time just to bring myself back to the status mentality. Once you're out of the status matrix, it's so hard to think back in. It's like, okay, I thought that group's violence was okay, but no other violence was. Why did I think that? Let me go back. So it's very hard to tap into that. So I do. Someone said on my most recent tweet, I said, 1850 status, we need slavery to produce things or else they won't be produced. 2018 status, we need taxes or else things won't be produced. Voluntarism wins in the end. Of course, that was more arrogant than usual, but someone commented after it had been retweeted, so I don't know this person from a hole in the wall. They said, taxation isn't theft because of the social contract. That was their entire justification. That, again, is just word throwing. They don't. So I responded. I said, say the social contract exists. Why does government have a monopoly on enforcing such a contract? What happens if government doesn't hold up their end? Because if I don't hold up my end, they put me in a cage and shoot me if they resist. So government, regardless of what you think about what happened on 9/11, did not keep those 3,000 people safe. Does that mean government goes to jail? Did George Bush go to jail for not keeping us safe on 9/11? Did any of the police? Did any of the air traffic controllers? Of course not, because they were running military drills at the same time intentionally to confuse them so the military couldn't respond. Besides the point, the social contract is so blatantly illegitimate. Why does the state have a monopoly? Why do they get to tax us whether they hold up their end or not? That's something I was so curious about, to get a real written response, and that person hasn't responded to me. I'm sure they're writing the most in-depth, philosophically clear essay, and that's why it's taken, I think, 10 hours, but it's just going to be that much better. So yes, I do fight on there sometimes, just to tap into the statist mindset again. And you can always plant seeds. That counts as a planted seed. A lot of the stuff I learned online. So even if we're just planting seeds through short questions, long paragraph fights, no, I don't do, no, you shouldn't do. And by you, I mean anyone watching this, just because but Larken Rose had a great post on Facebook about, to be pretty damn blunt, I feel like more voluntarists and libertarians care more about winning arguments than changing people's minds. And that is very different. You're absolutely right on that point, because there's a difference between tapping into someone's reality, asking them genuinely, and saying, you're not really telling me government's legitimate. Okay, I need to leave. That you're so stupid, I can't even talk to you. There's a huge difference, and it's all in your approach. Between arguing and convincing, it's all in your approach. And the supplement to this book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, is actually a seminar called Candles in the Dark that Larken Rose put on, which you had a great podcast with the actual anarchy gentleman on. So yeah, there's not only the superstition, but how to talk people out of it. You got to check out some of Larken Rose's videos on Candles in the Dark. He has a great talk with James Corbett.
Oh, I didn't know he talked to James about that. That's so awesome.
It is 50 minutes of bliss, bro. I wish I could erase it from my memory so I could experience it for the first time again. It's that good. In fact, yeah.
That's how I feel about all of James Corbett's stuff, is that I wish I could read it. Or I mean, even Mises and Rothbard, reading Anatomy of the State for the first time, like in my dreams, man. In my heaven is reading Anatomy of the State over and over again for the first time.
Yeah. Honestly, Anatomy of the State and this book, and arguably, well, I was real young, so it's different, but How an Economy Grows and Why It Crashes by Peter Schiff. Yeah. It has cartoons that go along. And I remember I was grounded for stealing alcohol from Safeway. Last time I violated the non-aggression principle, I think I was 16 years old at the time. I had no TV, so I'm just like, oh, let me read that economics book that I had heard about. And I read it in one sitting, and I'd just be like, oh my God. Before I just said the word, greed causes recession. Okay, there's been greed everywhere since the Egyptian Empire. That explains nothing. Capitalism, communism, socialism. So reading that book, I was just like, oh my God, it's so obvious. Yet, why didn't any of these people, the CNBCs, the Paul Krugmans, why didn't they see this coming? Why did Peter Schiff see it coming and Paul Krugman not see it? Nor any of the people on CNBC or the Wall Street Journal. Why isn't Peter Schiff on every single show throughout all of history explaining what happened when he should be on every TV show, every 24-hour news cycle saying, Peter, thank you for calling this. Thank you for facing that opposition. We were so wrong. Tell us what's right. So yes, your Anatomy of the State point that I've beaten like a dead horse, I completely get where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, it was quite the experience, man. And yeah, it's been a crazy ride ever since. And maybe this is moving to another point, just about advocating for liberty. Trying to stay positive is one big thing and so I always have to drive home the point that these are things I struggle with. That's why I'm talking about it. You know, I'm not always positive. I'm not always a paragon when I argue with people online, you know, but maybe what I have experienced is doing this show and meeting lots of great people. And just that in of itself, connecting with other ANCAPs and other voluntarists has done so much, just so much for me as a human being even. And I think we discussed this before. You know Chandlin Hudson, right? from the Defenders of Liberty. Like, how many other ANCAPs do you know in person and through the internet?
I know two ANCAPs. Chalin's the most solid guy I know personally. There was another ANCAP on Twitter. His name is Liberty First. His name is Brian Briggs. Him and I meet for dinner every now and then just to BS about statism.
Yeah.
But through the internet, it's so cool. I just love being able to DM people when I'm just the one Socratic thinker in a field of people worshiping Plato's cave. I think I don't know if this is something humans naturally need or it's just something that I currently experience, but I really need the reinforcement. Like when I see someone else do a video, it's like, people have my back. This is legitimate. When Owen Benjamin is on Stefan Molyneux's show and he goes, yeah, the left is so weird, but like the right, we have anarcho-capitalists, libertarians, Republicans. I'm like, he just said anarcho-capitalist. Like, it's that big. We went from Murray Rothbard inventing the term and there being like 25 libertarians, according to Walter Block in 1966, to it being said on a major show. Steven Crowder said it in his interview with Naomi Wolf. Well, some delusional socialist.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, I think the term anarcho-capitalism is a contradiction, which means he's heard about it.
Yeah.
We're slowly getting into the mind of the populace. And that's why I tweet out, I'll put like 3 or 4 covers of a book and just title my tweets Anarcho-Capitalist Studies. So whenever you type that into the search bar, there should be 10 of my tweets. And those are, I got like 50 books that are mainstream works on voluntarism, libertarianism. They're all anarcho-capitalist works. It's important that we get those out there so we're seen as more legitimate when people hear about our message. But yes, being able to DM people on Twitter, talk to them on YouTube has been so great. I mean, Mance Raider, who is in Alabama, getting retweeted by guys like Vin Armani, emailing people like Adam Kokesh, hearing about Larken Rose online and then meeting him in person right like 10 miles from my house. That was so cool. Mark Passio is going to be in Phoenix March 10th for the Truth Mind Reality Conference. It's going to be his last conference, according to him, by the way. So I'm really excited for that. And yeah, the internet's great to meet the like-mindeds too. So we don't totally lose our minds.
Yeah. Well, everyone in our movement is so accessible too. And there's still the nerves, when you, at least for me, there is trying to contact these people and get them on the show. But at the same time, it's not for anything because they're all solid people. I mean, they're voluntarists. Of course, they're solid people, but I met up with, like I said, Trey, but there is a Tom Woods group meeting in the Twin Cities on this Saturday, actually. And Tom won't be there, but it's, elite members and stuff like that. So I'm going to go. If there's anyone watching this show who lives in the Twin Cities area and has heard about this Tom Woods, DM me on Twitter or something. I'll give you the deets and we can chill. It's totally cool. But let's see what else I wanted to talk about. Do you have anything that you wanted to bring up?
Yes. So
yeah,
the Stefan Molyneux argument or a lot of ANCAPs who said, I'm voting for Trump because it's buying us time. All right, this is time. What are we going to do? We're not just going to talk about, trivial remarks Sarah Huckabee Sanders said. So here is what we can do to win the culture war if you agree with Andrew Breitbart that politics is downstream from culture. This little graph, or diagram rather, that Larken Rose had put in his Candles in the Dark seminar package shows that it's when you're talking to someone, you're much more effective to not talk to them as though they are a bad person advocating violence, but rather talk to them as though they have a bad idea and they are accidentally advocating what they know to be immoral. For example, you can ask 99% of people, is violence justified? They'll say no. Then you'll ask, is government justified? They'll say yes. those two opinions are contradictory. They really do believe in non-initiation of violence and only violence through self-defense, but you need to treat them like they are a good person just with a bad idea. The second diagram to win the culture war.
Wait, hold on. Go back to that first diagram because the screen was a little blurry. What is the top graphic?
Okay, so the top graphic is okay. It is you, the voluntarist, talking to the statist, and him saying, "Yes, this is the way to communicate." He talk to them like you're criticizing this bad idea that is in their head, not the second one where
not
it's
them.
you versus them, because it's not you versus them. It's you and them versus the bad idea. And that's a much better way of saying it. Literally, my average statist friend is such a good person, but when they advocate for, say, U.S. foreign policy or any tax initiatives, they are acting immoral, not to what I think, but even even contrary to what they themselves believe. And I can prove that to them just by getting them to think logically. Please screenshot that and recognize it, because that's so important for us. Now, something for them. Here is the diagram to win the culture war against the statist. The first one we can just keep amongst ourselves pretty much. But this second diagram, it shows lawmakers, law enforcers, and everyone else. This is how people generally see the state as being legitimate. We have some lawmakers, their laws are legitimate. The law enforcers, it's legit for them to enforce and interpret the laws and no one else, and everyone else who has to obey the other two groups. What we need to get to win the culture war is for people to look at this and only see people, not one group having any more rights than anyone else. If I walk up to you in a Hawaiian shirt and tell you what to do, I don't have the right to rule you. If I walk up to you in body paint, I don't have the right to rule you. If I walk up to you with a badge, I don't have the right to rule you. If I walk up to you in a badge and someone has told me my badge is legitimate, it's not. It doesn't give me the right to rule. This is how we're going to win. It's so simple. Just by holding people to the same standards we hold everyone else to, we will not tear down the state, rip down the White House or anything. When you take away its legitimacy, then it no longer has the power it previously did. If I were to try to just walk outside and enslave someone, the only way I could really do it, because no one that I know really recognizes my right to own another person, that we need to make that as equal as my right to own property and someone else's right not to initiate violence against it, no matter which group they're with, even if that group is the Congress group or the police group.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it makes me think of Beetlejuice, actually, because maybe that people will identify with that, because at the end of Beetlejuice, they say Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, and then his power is just like, he just melts away, So,
and then the other thing I want to mention is beware of the great logical fallacy that the statists use. Among many, there's the obvious double standard. What is theft for me is taxation for them. What's mass murder for me is war for them. The clear double standard is the most common logical fallacy. But a close second is what's called the non-sequitur. So Eric July talked about this in his video. But what about the poor? When someone says poor people exist, they are not justifying the legitimacy of a group to initiate violence against a larger group of people. So when they say, well, what about other foreign governments or other terrorists? Them saying that the existence of terrorism, the need for education, the need for roads, by saying those things, you're not legitimizing force. You're not legitimizing the initiation of aggression. We come across it so much we don't recognize it. It's like, that doesn't follow. Oh, but what happens if X occurs? It doesn't matter what happens to people, if the government doesn't prearrange marriages, the state doesn't have the right to do that. Well, what happens if there's no taxes? I don't know. I'm not claiming to be a psychic. I'm claiming to have knowledge in philosophy and morality. That's my claim. So the non sequitur happens so much, we got to say, hold on, stop. What you just said, are you saying then it's okay to initiate violence to achieve that end? Do you have that right? Does everyone have that right? Or does the state have a monopoly? Why do they have a monopoly and not not the people I work with? What if we got you to vote for someone every few years? It's thinking consistency and recognizing the non sequitur is how we'll win the culture war, and explain those two diagrams to people that are so important in how to convince people of voluntarism.
Yeah, and I really do think that we're making progress here, because maybe I have such a small sample size, and maybe it's the internet, but I really do think that we're getting places. Whether it's, seeing a lot of young kids on Twitter who have like anime avatars, or I think that's pretty common amongst the young kids, is that they're having anime avatars, or like, I don't know, illustrations of like a character or something like that. But or having like, there's this like, I don't know, 12 or 13-year-old kid on Twitter, or like ANCAP kid who does YouTube videos. I really think that maybe it might be getting trendy. Is it trendy to be an ANCAP? Do you think? It's edgy, man. It's edgy.
No. And when I say no, I mean unfortunately not. Oh, another thing. Milo Yiannopoulos said, I think government should only exist for infrastructure and defense. In my darkest moments, I'd go ANCAP. And I'm like, he just said it. And this, a couple years ago, he made a Facebook post, I might be anarcho-capitalist. And then Jeff Berwick brought him to Anarcho-Poco, where he spoke. And he got to meet Larken Rose. So is it trendy? We need to make it trendy. So by that, I mean, never saying, what you and I can do is always say that is our position, using the words libertarian anarchist, voluntarist, or anarcho-capitalist. We need to be so okay with saying it that other people are cool with saying it too.
Is it too clunky, though?
I'm sorry?
Sorry to cut you off, but is it too clunky to say like ANCAP or anarcho-capitalist, or like should we call ourselves abolitionists? Like, that probably wouldn't go over well with the public.
No, you definitely need to bring marketing in. But hey, then again, maybe again, there's no central plan. So maybe if I said I'm an abolitionist, and they go, but slavery's over, I said, the drug war exists, so slavery is not over. A group of people claim to own your body. How is that not slavery? They'll kill you if you resist doing anything they say. They got libraries of their laws. No one can interpret them. They can't even interpret the goddamn Second Amendment. It's like 20 words, and every judge has a different way of interpreting it. And they say you have to abide by all of these laws, these thousands of regulations that no one's ever read, let alone can people interpret them. So yes, the claim of ownership over other people and their property exists. Therefore, slavery exists. And maybe you do kind of get that Milo Yiannopoulos shock culture. I'm an abolitionist, and because of that, I'm an anarcho-capitalist. Maybe that's one way to, jump at people just to get their attention.
Yeah. Who knows? But yeah, talking about being trendy, I don't know. We're a bunch of nerdy guys in our basements. I don't know. It looks like you have an apartment. I have an apartment, but it is in the basement. It's not my mom's apartment, or I'm not in my mom's basement or anything. But
so what? Not a justification for initiating violence.
Oh,
someone who believes in peace lives here and not there with that person. Therefore, I get to initiate violence against peaceful people. Nice try. Another non sequitur. Every frickin' ANCOM on that Facebook page, ANCAP versus ANCOM. I just got off that thing because it was so horrible.
Oh yeah, I left a long time ago. But let's see. Well, I forgot what I was going to say, but it had some with being trendy or something like that. I mean, we're pretty cool. Libertarianism it should be cool. Like Judd Weiss was saying this on the Tom Woods show months ago, but how do we find a way to make libertarianism cool? I think it's through the internet, obviously, but because that's so important, having people in the culture like Dave Smith, and I think he's one of the leading figures, is speaking to, you know, the mainstream everyman. He's an entertainer. You know, how do we influence the culture that way? Because there's so many negative influences on the culture currently, you know, in Hollywood, and I think people are pushing back, you know, obviously with the Trump situation, but it really is. It is a battle. And I've kind of talked about politics downstream from culture. I think that's not always true, but for our purposes, it is, because we want to affect change in the world. I think politics can affect culture negatively, like 9/11, or the, you know, just all the spying and the FISA courts and stuff like that. But how do we influence that culture? I mean, I've tried with my YouTube gaming channel that I don't know, or doing the show or something like that. What do you think?
What I do is I just play my comparative advantage or absolute advantage. My niche that I think it's just totally being myself and really explain how I feel about these things, because as pissed off as I get at little things, I think that's what makes me a little different than Mance Raider, who's more calm. So Mance Raider puts together a treasure chest of libertarian images, and he puts those out. And Ben Stone puts out a subversion book. And Tom Woods puts out a podcast refuting every single thing every single statist has ever said. In 1,100 shows, yes, he's gotten to everything. So I think my way of getting in the culture is making it okay to talk politics, making it okay to be interested in something. So it's not just something nerdy where, you know, someone, you know, talks real slow. It's okay to get passionate and get really real and energetic about immorality that's occurring. Look, if these dumb shits can spend the entire day talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers, we can spend 10 minutes being passionate about the absolute genocides caused by the governments in the 20th century alone. I mean, dear God, how is that nuts? Look at the amount of wealth that's been created by entrepreneurs in the Western world, and look at the 1 billion people in Asia being lifted out of poverty, not because Mao's Great Leap Forward is finally being implemented fully, and we're finally seeing the long-term effects of Vladimir Lenin's new economic policy. No, it's because of capitalism. Yaron Brook, who I made a video about, 4 great quotes by Yaron Brook. He goes, oh God, yeah, he's talking about Walmart. He said, Walmart has done more to raise the standard of living of poor Americans than any government program. That's something tangible. That's so cool. I can get more things in this house than I otherwise would if entrepreneurs weren't competing for my dollar. That is so cool. And we need to make that okay to be excited about, and maybe shove in people's faces sometimes, because it is that important.
Well, and that's why I appreciate what you're doing. And I tried to emulate it because I've made this realization in the last 2 weeks that having an hours-long podcast and expecting people to come to it isn't really working. And so what you've done is you've created these short, punchy, and Mance was onto this too, but he's created these short, punchy YouTube videos to try and engage people on that level and kind of bring them in. But that I think that's kind of the difficulty that you run into in the age of the internet, is that yes, we have all this access to knowledge. Yes, we have the ability to be, you know, a jack off sitting in his apartment with a webcam and a microphone, with the ability to reach thousands of people at the drop of a hat. But we also are dealing with that shortened attention span and the need to be flashy and the need to catch people's attention. You know, I don't know how that bodes for us, you know, trying to get people to go through this months long process of neglect, of getting rid of the state in your mind and getting rid of that power over you and converting to the ANCAP. That is, I think, the biggest thing, because no one becomes an ANCAP overnight. I went through a years-long process. I went an intense 6-month process of reading Rothbard and Mises and Hoppe and Tom Woods and Bob Murphy. I could go on and on and on. So how do we overcome that? Because what we're asking people to do is to devote 6 months of their lives towards studying economics.
We have to say, okay, well, we have to look back at our experiences and really comprehend our experiences so we can take this terrible, teeth dragging month process and say, all right, what were the red pill moments for me? What was so important that if I could only tell, one person a couple things or everyone one thing, what would it be? It's our job to read through this big ass book, Defending the Undefendable, and saying, oh, okay, there's a really important part in this introduction. He says, the impetus for this book is libertarianism. A book not about libertarianism, just a random author with a PhD talking about it. The basic premise of this philosophy is that it is illegitimate to engage in aggression against non-aggressors. Who can't identify with that? He then goes on to say, now most people agree with that, but this does imply that taxation is illegitimate because taxation initiates violence against non-payers. There's so many ways. Maybe just, I think people won't look cool if you can make them look stupid. Even though being stupid is kind of cool sometimes, and women will say like, oh, that guy's mysterious, when he's really just a total idiot. If you can make someone look stupid, because statism is stupid. It's the most false god human beings have ever worshipped. It's so blatantly contradictory that if we can find ways through questions, through rebuttals, to really make people look stupid, we'll look cool. The culture will be, oh, ANCAPs, those guys, they really know what they're talking about. So that is our job, along with simply having a variety of ways to explain things.
Okay, so now I'm going to get a little controversial. You ready for this?
Yes.
I think that and I'm not condemning anyone, but I think there's a significant portion of the online libertarian ANCAP community that does not really understand. They learned anarcho-capitalism and were converted through internet subcultures and memes and stuff like that, and they haven't actually sat down to study. Is that a problem we need to concern ourselves with? I mean, I don't want to be a central authority. This is a decentralized thing, but what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that subset exists?
Yeah, you know what? I like naming names because I believe in accountability, but no one's name comes to mind directly.
Yeah, there's no one in particular. Just people I've seen who seem.
Okay,
yeah.
So I would say absolutely, it's important for us to make it available to them. I spent today's my day off this week, so I spent the day uploading short articles on anarcho-capitalism and libertarianism to archive.org. My username is KeithKnight13 on there, and issue.com. ISSUU. I have 56,000 imprints on that site. So just making it available is, Jesus, what was your question again? You were okay. People that don't fully grasp the message. Absolutely. That is a way of what all I heard you say was, should we have standards? Absolutely, we should have standards. I was a conservative, and then it was basically just this watering down of, well, maybe George Bush wasn't perfect, but Bush had a lot to deal with. Conservatives, you're idiots if you don't speak out against this, and you're not conserving shit. If you support a guy who doubled the national debt in 2 terms, it's like Washington to Bill Clinton, $5 trillion. Clinton to Bush, $10 trillion. Obama to the end of Obama, 10 to 20 trillion. So, so when groups don't have standards for themselves, infiltration and getting knocked down is so much easier, because people will say taxation is theft. No, it's not. You get something for taxation, like you get the road or something like that. And they'll go, well, son of a bitch, I guess I was wrong about that. No, accepting a meal from the slave master who's initiating violence against you is not a trade. So absolutely, we need to have standards for, not for us, for status, but especially ourselves. I am more upset when I see an ANCAP have inconsistent arguments or not really make a good point, because you're representing me as I'm representing you. So I hold them to a much higher standard. There isn't shit a statist could say that would surprise me. I have heard so many things. Actually, I lied. I read something the other day that surprised me, and I uploaded a video about it today, just because it was so shocking to me. I just rebutted an article. It said, the title of the article was "No Taxation Isn't Theft. It's Not Your Money," and it's my latest video, and it is, and it's just shocking to read the words coming off this page. But yes, absolutely, we need standards for each other, or else anyone can just say, "Yeah, I believe in government, but I'm an anarcho-capitalist." No. One or the other. We need to keep our brand good, so other brands can't say, "Oh yeah, we're that," and make us look like we're a worse product than we otherwise are, because the philosophy is so solid. Everyone needs to recognize the books and authors by name that I've put on Twitter under the title Anarcho-Capitalist Studies. Just search that, know all those books. Even if you can only read a review or only read some of them, they're so important to just have.
So then, though, do we get into the infighting territory? So, it's important to have standards for people within our own group, but at what point does it get to the point where it's unproductive? And I've made videos about this, but yeah, the infighting question. What do you think about that?
I did watch your video on infighting. Infighting is important when you're trying to preserve the principle of your movement. It is unproductive when you are fighting about trivial things that would not necessarily keep people away from embracing your principles. That is my take on that.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. I generally, it's been so depressing to see some people infight, because like we were talking about before, I think everyone has their different roles, in our movement, and whether it's Adam Kokesh being the guy that can reach vets, or Stefan Molyneux having these hours long, and I don't, does Stefan Molyneux identify as an ANCAP anymore?
Yes.
Does he? Okay.
He has said it as recently as his mock debate with Michael Malice, as well as his pre-discussion with Adam Kokesh, which he did put up as a video altogether, showing that he has no problem being called that. He simply sees Donald Trump as buying us time, which, no matter what you think about Stefan, he is a guy who, from like his first video up until a couple years ago, his first video in 2007 until 2015 when Trump ran, he answered every single, what about privatized nukes? What if a guy builds a road around your house and charges you $1 trillion to go out? He answered every single one of those things. So if we're sending him to go talk to the Trump people, I think that's perfect. I think that is absolute. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And the Molyneux haters, read Everyday Anarchy, read Practical Anarchy, and then shut up, because those two books are so terrific that had he done nothing else and just wrote those two books alongside the ton of videos talking about the non-aggression principle, he would have done more than 99% of all libertarians in the positive direction. So yes, he does.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's how I got here. I watched Stefan Molyneux's videos. I really enjoy his The Truth About series. Though that's
Mm.
my, and I think that's pretty popular. But my favorite, one of my favorites was The Fall of Rome and Modern Parallels. What were you gonna say?
I did not see that one, but it's so funny. I was a minarchist flirting with anarcho-capitalism. I went to an Institute for Humane Studies conference who does the learnliberty.org. Phenomenal site. Excellent YouTube channel as well. I went there and I heard someone talk about no government, and I was so shocked. I'm like, God, get this guy's making us look bad. And then I talked to someone else, and they were an anarchist. And then I talked to Art Carden. Then I talked to Isaac Morehouse, and then he's an anarchist. Then I talked to T.K. Coleman, who works with Isaac, and he's an anarchist. And then and then I'm just like, oh my God, this is, these people don't even want government. And then I started looking into it, and just randomly, while I was researching slavery, just on my own time, I came across The Truth About Slavery by Stefan Molyneux, where he talks about how the census of 1860 in America showed that there were thousands of black slave owners, something all of our teachers keep forgetting to mention, because we just need to spend the whole day cracker bashing for some reason. Um, uh, the Truth About Slavery, when I didn't even know anything about his channel or that it would be about libertarianism, I just watched that and I'm like, oh, what else does this guy do? And I'm like, oh, he's a libertarian. Then I'm like, whoa, he's one of these guys that doesn't believe in government at all. That this guy's obviously no good. But then the more stuff of his I watched, the more thinking he got me to engage in. But that's one of the major things that pulled me over.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and the parallel with the mainstream LPers, because I was table, so I'm in the Federalist Society, although I would disagree with a lot of their stuff, but I have a preference for states' rights, and we could get into that kind of stuff. But at my law school, I'm in the Federalist Society, and we were tabling one day, and there was a libertarian that came up who lives in New Hampshire at the Free State Project and is a hybrid student. And we were talking about libertarianism, because I was like, yeah, I'm, a libertarian. The Federalist Society is kind of libertarian in some instances. But he was saying, oh, I'm a libertarian too. I live in New Hampshire, all this and that. And he's like, but I'm not one of those that believe that like taxation is theft or anything. Like there are adults in the room here, and I'm like, interesting. So how about you explain to me how taxation isn't theft, and then we can talk. But
Well,
yeah.
Well, that is a great thing. First, being genuine to people, not running up, hey, read For a New Liberty, read Ethics of Liberty. By first showing someone that you're genuine, that you're real, and that you're knowledgeable in topics, that gives such a solid legitimacy to your ideology. So when they see, oh, Patrick's a nice guy, he's able to talk, he has a variety of topics we can relate, oh, and he's an ANCAP, that makes them so much more likely to embrace the ideology in the future. The thing I love about Antifa is they're so unattractive. All of them are ugly. They look like, I think it was Trevor Noah called them vegan ISIS. Just terrific. Because there are a bunch of idiots who, against my AK-47, I can deal with all of Antifa in 5 minutes. So when you are talking with someone and they see you hold this idea, how you portray yourself, unfortunately, it's irrational and illogical, but it will determine how they see your ideas. Oh, every libertarian I know is a total dick. That's going to hurt libertarianism. Oh, libertarians are cool, but it's those stupid ANCAPs. That is going to change how people really see things. And that's what I think about a lot of. I mean, if I heard someone say I'm with Antifa, I'm picturing an idiot who can't think for themselves, so they go around initiating violence against businesses. They've only done so because Trump is maybe threatening their leftist communist agenda a little bit. So I do it because that's who is likely to be that name. When people associate smart, nice, generous with libertarian, that's how we're going to get in the minds of people and really persuade people in big numbers.
Well, yeah, and unfortunately, I've heard from people who have heard of ANCAPism and have interacted with ANCAPs and say, yeah, they're assholes. They're a bunch of know-it-all assholes that want to be right all the time. And that,
Ooh,
yeah,
I heard Austin Peterson say that to Tom Woods, to which I would respond, in which way are they an asshole? And Peterson, they're such dicks, you know, they whatever, they think they know it all. And I'd say, what's worse, a person who thinks they know it all, or a person who wants to put you in a cage for not initiating violence against someone? Just two people.
who also happens to think they know it all.
Yeah.
For the second one, yeah.
And the statist is actually the arrogant know-it-all. In fact, the statist is such a know-it-all. They know one group should have a coercive monopoly on the lives of 330 million Americans they've never met. They don't know their names. I don't know what's best for my next door neighbor, let alone all 330 million Americans. They are so confident to this degree that they're willing to force it on people. I would only forcibly take someone and move them if I knew a train was coming, if I knew they were going to fall off a curb, if I knew one person was kidnapping another, I would I would use force. But the statist is the arrogant prick, so much so that he believes in using violence for his prickiness. So the argument that and subset of this group that I've run into isn't cool, therefore the ideology is illegitimate. Another non sequitur. And we're back to something I said 20 minutes ago, because you do run into this a lot. And caps are jerks, therefore the ideology is illegitimate. Incorrect.
Yeah, yeah. Totally incorrect. But yeah, like I said, though, just trying to, I don't want to preach, you know, because like I said, I'm not, you know, the perfect deliverer of the message, but just trying to be a paragon and trying to win arguments with pathos, you know, showing your virtue and trying to empathize with people. And getting back to the greatest superstition, I see Larken Rose as being the bedside guest. You know, he has a bedside manner where he can tell a little story to you, and on a friendly level that is just digesting Rothbard and Mises and all the lessons that we've internalized, and putting it in a manageable, you know, everyman, so to speak, without losing the complexity of the idea. Just such a good job. So everyone should go check out the greatest or the most dangerous superstition if you haven't already, because is when did you say that you read the most dangerous superstition again? Was it early in your journey?
Oh no, it was once I was a convinced ANCAP, and the book was, so I had heard about it and seen videos on it. So the video I have posted on my channel under the title Anarchism in One Lesson. That is the most dangerous superstition in video form. Now,
Okay.
I didn't come across a copy of the book until I went to the Candles in the Dark seminar in March of last year it was December of the year before. And he had copies there on sale for $10. So I bought one there, and I was just blown away. It's so important. There's free PDFs online on archive.org. I've uploaded one. Just go to there and download it, put it onto your cell phone, put it onto your tablet. There's so many important things. I am working on a project right now where I just read one chapter at a time out of this book and upload it. I think there's like 50 chapters or something. That is the content list. So right now I'm working on a video for each one of those, just to get the small introductions. Because when you see what a red pill it is, you're just like, oh my God, I need to sit down and put some candles up and really take all this in. Maybe a little Mozart in the background, because it's so important that you'll really want to read it.
Maybe some wine in a bath as well.
Oh yeah. You know what? Drinking sometimes is such a nice escape. Like I jokingly tweeted, let's drink like there's no government or something. But it's so nice to just have an escape from taking everything seriously, because we do have an obligation to take everything seriously and explain the non-aggression principle to everyone in our lives and people we can reach through the internet. But it's so nice to just drink and not talk about anything solid. Like when I go to the bar, I can just talk about nothing, and it's such a nice relief that when I get up the next day, I'm like, that was an excellent refresher. Time to fight for voluntarism, going back into the trenches.
See, with me, I'm still in my evangelical phase. It's lasted about 2 years, maybe 3 years now, where all I want to fucking talk about is this shit, and that's what the podcast is. You know what? Have you struggled with that? It seems like you enjoy your reprieve.
You know what? I really go by the work hard, play hard philosophy of the overwhelmingly vast majority of the time. I am thinking about ways to advocate, discussions I've had, getting into the mind of my opponents, just because I can't get it out of my mind. It's like being in love with something. Not that we're accused of being cultish enough. Whereas worshiping a flag and dying for a group of psychopaths, that's not a cult. But if you believe in nonviolence consistently, you're a cultist. Oh, watch out! Watch out for him. Just another one of the blatant inconsistencies these people have. I do find it rough to balance work and play, because sometimes I will get the, dude, you're always so argumentative, or you're not very well balanced. You do a lot of this and not a lot of that. I just really try to make sure at least twice a month I go out, I get drunk. I stopped using Adderall after that spiraled out of control. I haven't done that in 6 months, and that used to be my real escape. But yeah, just getting drunk and being around friends and talking about nothing is such a great way to reboot. Because first of all, you deserve it. Second of all, you just need it for your mental health, because you will burn out. Mark Passio, the great anarchist, made a podcast the other day saying, if I don't get 3 people in Philadelphia to help me in person, I'm going to stop doing what I do after 10 years. So he is blown out. He's just exhausted himself. He went all in with these big expectations. And I mean, just think about how hard it must have been for Walter Block and Murray Rothbard in 1966 to work on books, and the books say the government is illegitimate from a right-leaning standpoint. That is so. If you think it's hard to say now, when there are a lot of people who call themselves anarchists, and it's talked about, and Michael Malice is saying, I'm an anarchist on Fox News. If you think it's hard now, think of how hard it is for them. So the stakes are much lower now. And hey, I don't want this to turn into an American Revolution type. I want this to be completely peaceful in the transition from statism. I just really want it to be, that's illegitimate. You need to take time to stop participating in this, police and military, and we need to recognize their right to rule is not legitimate. I want this to be totally peaceful.
Yeah, totally agree. Peaceful.
So yeah, that includes making friends. That includes being out there, learning new things that aren't just about politics, which is where you have to balance your time, really.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had I've been kind of trying to balance it too, because one of my biggest critiques of people that I knew that were feminists in college or something like that was that they were or the whole homosexual thing is that a lot of the times that would be all that they were. Like, I'm gay. That's who I am. That's all that I am. And I really don't want that. I don't want it to be that way when it comes to, Patrick and libertarianism. So I don't know. I enjoy music, I really like to write creatively. I play guitar, so I have other interests, and I have a great wife who is not very political, but I torture her anyways. So what are some things you like to do outside? Because it's, if we're on the topic of, because this is how to be a good advocate for liberty, right? What do you do for fun?
you have to be able to relate to people. As far as I know, I think you have to be able to relate to people, because if they see you, I think that is one of the main reasons that Donald Trump beat all 16 veterans who were Republicans and the most popular Democrat on the planet. He did it, and he's a billionaire. There's like 400 billionaires, and he's relating to the average person. I was at his rally in Phoenix, Arizona to talk to people, and I went inside. This billionaire who's on TV related to people by using the language they use, by saying, get that guy out of, you know what we used to do to that guy? We'd knock him the hell out. CNN is fake news. We got to fucking get these guys. Using that language, that's what got them to communicate with a billionaire who's now the president, who had his own show, who had multiple corporations he was the chairman of. That's how he got people to resonate with him and listen to his message. So what I do is, I know that as a good advocate, I need to be a genuine person, which I try to be either way. Even if I know I'll never convince this communist, my sister, for instance, I'll never convince them. What they say about me, what they tell their friends, I know my sister tells everyone I'm a libertarian, but I know that it's met by, but he's smarter than the overwhelmingly vast majority of socialists that are in our group. So I would not want any of you to debate him because he looks pretty bad. Having that message out there, being seen through the lenses of legitimacy is so important, that's what I recognize whenever I have any conversation with someone, because they will see the movement by the people who communicate the message. So that's one way. I love going to amusement parks. I get such a rush out of those things. I love watching Modern Family.
Yeah.
I love watching old episodes of Seinfeld and Family Guy, and just laughing at the brilliance behind these jokes, behind Kramer going into Jerry's apartment and Jerry saying, "What are you doing? You got surgery tomorrow. You shouldn't be eating." And Kramer going, "Fasting before surgery? No. You need your strength. You got to eat a big meal before surgery." I mean, these things are so funny when the actors do them, that you got to appreciate the fruits of freedom, as well as develop relationships with people. So when you promote the ideas, they don't see you as a zealot. They see you as a nice person, and they recognize the idea as that much better because it's being promoted by someone who they trust, someone who they believe in, someone they know who's honest and reliable. All those things are important, I think. I could be totally wrong.
Someone who doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. Maybe most importantly, the first step I guess you could do is renounce being aggressive and illegitimately aggressive. But yeah,
you know, but before I forget this, here's one thing that I've really gotten people to go with. I said, so why is the left more afraid today of Trump than Trump like 10 years ago? And they'll say, because he's president, you idiot. And I said, whoa, but before, he used to be the chairman of a business. Aren't businesses predatory? And government's there to help us, but businesses are predatory, out for profit, out to get you. Shouldn't we like him now and have been afraid of him then? What about Roy Moore in Alabama? Aren't you devastated that he lost? Because now he's in the predatory private sector, monopolist, profit-seeking exploiter. They realize that they need to realize, and I try to show this to them, everything all the power, all the guns, all the control over healthcare you want Obama to have, Trump's going to have. Hey, Trump supporters, you idiots like Milo Yiannopoulos saying government should regulate Twitter like a public utility. You're a fucking moron, Milo. That power is going to be in the hands of Elizabeth Warren in 2020 or 2024. You dunce. Instead of promoting voluntary competition. I read an article the other day. I forget what year it was published, maybe 10 years ago. It said, are we ever going to defeat the MySpace monopoly? And it was about MySpace having a social media monopoly. Imagine saying, Blockbuster is going to be done in a couple years. Always think of out innovating in a free market rather than socializing all this power and giving one person all the control. But every Republican and Democrat statist can resonate when I say, look, you want to give Obama all the guns? If you really think Trump's a racist and it was that easy for him to get there when he didn't have the media on his side, isn't he just going to take away health care from black people if the government controls health care? Isn't he going to just round up blacks if it, or just do all these things against women or minorities that the left claims they'll do? Or hey, Mr. Guy on the right, you believe in a military controlled by the state and funded coercively. Do you want Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Barack Obama in charge, or Maxine Waters in charge of that military? I think Nancy Pelosi would be a good head of the U.S. military, don't you? That is the power you're giving them. How about Keith Ellison bragging about holding up a book, Antifa? Psychopath. He's advocating anarcho-communism in the worst totalitarian form at the state level, obviously. Every one of his tweets, the comments are about, we need to nationalize healthcare, cell phones, computers, housing, water, food, shelter. It's so bad that it's like, it's so hard to communicate that when you make it as simple as everything you give Trump, you're giving to Elizabeth Warren. Everything you didn't give Obama, be appreciative that Trump doesn't have that power now. One of the many ways, in a non-confrontational way, you can quickly say, God, I'm glad we didn't get health or Medicaid for all under Obama, because now Trump would just deny it for all everyone in the press who he doesn't like, right? Can't we agree on that, Mr. Left Statist? That's a great way of getting people to, oh, so the less power they have, the better. Now apply that consistently until you're at zero state.
Yeah. So in closing here, are you optimistic for the future?
Very. The more, there's a great quote about being a short-term pessimist but a long-term optimist. I am that when I first came across the arguments of, here's how the economy really works by Tom Woods in his excellent book, Meltdown. I'm like, God, it's going to be hard to convince people of this and education and healthcare. But then I realized there was an underlying principle on the economic arguments. A group of people that get money coercively have no incentive to produce a better product, nor do they lower the price and increase the quality when they don't face competition. That's why everything economically, everything the government does is garbage. Morally, we also have the argument. Anything that exists, you have the right to not participate in. That includes money, that includes your time. So whether you're physically there or someone's confiscating your property to fund their endeavor. Because our arguments are so philosophically sound and morally consistent, and statism is exactly the opposite, is why I'm optimistic about the future. However, it's not going to magically come about. As good as the arguments are for abolitionism, without constant persistence from the abolitionists, it never would have come about. So we need to put the mantle on ourselves and not say, yeah, the arguments are good. People will eventually get around to accepting it. No, they will not. It's on us. And yes, I am optimistic, especially when I got great guys like you to work with.
Well, I appreciate that, Keith. I was excited to get on with you because we had such a fun time last time. And
I did not have a fun time last time.
Oh, that's right, because you were the statist. We played devil's advocate, but yeah. So you mentioned burning out earlier, and just as a last note, I wanted to talk about how I came into this with no expectations. Like, I don't expect that we'll ever live in Ancapistan. And I am a pessimist, on the other hand. I think we do have truth on our side, but when it comes to making people see that truth, I don't think there's any good prospects. But I do it anyways, and I'm hoping that by doing it and not expecting anything from it, I'll be surprised and happy with the results. What do you think?
Well, dude, if the government can convince people of their legitimacy, we can convince people of ours. It will take a hell of a long time. And no, of course, you and I aren't going to see it. I mean, Aristotle was talking about slavery in 1,000 years before Jesus Christ walked the earth. You and I aren't going to see it. We are planting the seeds for a very profitable tree in the long run. Now, what you can do is live it in your own life. Stefan Molyneux talks about this in Practical Anarchy. In his book, Everyday Anarchy, he says, every time you engage in a voluntary interaction, understand why it's better economically and morally, and you'll be living like an anarchist. It gives you a reason to do things that you previously didn't have. Well, it's the law, I can do it. You have a much more virtuous life if you understand the reasoning, the philosophy behind your activities, behind your thoughts, behind your reasoning. You live a much more noble life as opposed to the average animal-like statist who says, does government let me do it? Maybe if I get away with it, oh no, let me just obey the police officer. What Trump says is legitimate. What Obama says is legitimate. No thinking for yourself. It is you embracing it philosophically does change how you see even authority. I used to think I had a constant moral obligation to anyone in authority. The difference being between my employer and the president, my employer relationship is voluntary and the president's involuntary. However, I still only interact with people when there is a mutually voluntary beneficial exchange. If it's not beneficial for me, he's going to hear about it. I don't have a right to serve him. I have a right to get my needs met. That is a way you can live today. You can constantly negotiate. Statism has nothing to do with negotiation, has to do with violence. Anarchism, anarcho-capitalism, has to do with you respecting your personhood, and that is seeking your self-interest. That is a way you can change today. It's not like only in 1,000 years will we reap the benefits of this ideology. You can do it today. I talk back to people I previously, metaphorically, bent over for. I now talk back to people that I used to be subservient to because I thought I owed them something, and I'm not one to talk back or something like that. I realize my value in things that I previously didn't because of this philosophy. So yes, I'm much more optimistic, and which is good. We get to disagree on something. It's not just a total echo chamber in here.
Oh yeah, hey, well, the disagreement comes with agreement because even though I am pessimistic for the future, I have tried to emulate that, in my own life and try and live without, as if there was no state, and try to remain happy, because if you're unhappy, then the state wins, is what I've always kind of said. And I think it kind of starts with what Jordan Peterson has said, even though he's not an ANCAP, is that, if you want to change the world, make your bed. Start with making your bed, clean your room, have a good relationship with your spouse or the people that love you and the people that you love. And I guess that's just part of living a good life. And I guess I'm trying to do that, and not perfect, obviously, but
and don't be afraid to have fun with it.
Yeah.
When you see Trump signed into law, look at I looked at people in my break room next to me. I said, you think if I wrote something down and forced millions of people to do what I said, you think they'd do it? How crazy do they have to be? There was a cop parked in a no parking zone, and I tweeted a picture of it. And as I saw him coming out, something the non-statist in me would say, oh, yes, he's doing what's right for society. He has legitimacy. I said,
it'd be better to stay there.
I know. When I saw him coming back to his car, and I'm in my work outfit, by the way, so I'm on the clock, I said, hey, watch out. I hope no one writes you a ticket for parking there. Now, that, of course, doesn't usher in ANCAPistan. What it does do is let people know that I don't recognize you as morally superior, pal. That you and I only have so much power. That's a small thing I can do. No one person alone can do it, but they can play their role. And if that means chipping off a small part of the Vladimir Lenin statue, eventually, if everyone does that, which they have an obligation to, people will not recognize that statue with such worship as they previously did. Constantly just throwing out things to coworkers, to police officers, to people in the military. I always ask people in the military if they killed anyone, and that is the number one thing you never touch on. And I said, and they go, well, had to do some things, have to do some things there in war.
Did you have to do it? Did you really have to do it?
And I said, so according to, I said, well, why'd you go into Afghanistan? And this guy from high school that I knew said, well, dude, it was like right after 9/11. I said, okay, you just told me the time they went in. You didn't say why. According to the official 9/11 story written by Thomas Keane and Philip Zelikow, 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. Why did the U.S. invade Afghanistan, and why did you invade Afghanistan? He goes, man, that's why I like talking to you, man. You know a lot of stuff. Just by showing that person you don't know what you're doing, that is chipping away at this monster of illegitimacy we know as the state.
Yeah, well, and just the other night, me and my wife were hanging out with a really good couple friend of ours, and we love them. But we were talking about, because my wife's family is Mormon or LDS, and they've adopted some kids from Haiti. And we were talking about it, and they were like, oh, so what did you think about what Trump said? And I said, I don't give a fuck what Trump says about Haiti. I mean, yes, Haiti's a shithole. Like, there's children eating from piles of garbage. And I just, it kind of floored me why they would care so much about why they would care so much that Trump said something. I don't care what Trump says. Trump doesn't represent me. He doesn't represent anyone,
Exactly. And what I ask people, these idiots who are into gossip columning, Katie Couric on Adam Carolla's show, I think the people, ever since seeing, what is going on since this president's taken office, we need to vote. Nothing in principle. It's all gossip. It's Trump drinks 12 Diet Cokes a day. Trump said Mexican. Trump said attractive women would let you grab them by the genitals if you're rich. It's all trivial shit. I'm like, Obama bombed people's houses. You know that thing that almost happened in Hawaii? That happened under Obama's watch daily as a causal result of Obama's actions. What's worse, calling a place a shithole or bombing it into being a shithole?
Yeah.
Murdering people or saying the words shithole? You have no moral stance with me. Your argument's illegitimate. And that's what I've said multiple times. Even the Charlottesville thing. Trump said some of the white nationalists were good people. Well, first of all, Augustus Sol Invictus was there, so yeah, some of them are. But they focus so much on these trivial gossip columns because they know that every principle that is wrong with Trump is also wrong with Hillary and Obama and Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. I mean, so when they say, "Ooh, Russia and Putin might have interfered in our country's political system," Hillary is on camera saying, "Hey, Gaddafi, we came, we saw, he died. Does that count as interfering in a political system?" No. Putin, WikiLeaks, Russia. There's no consistency, and when we point that out, we're subverting the legitimacy. It only has power because of its perceived legitimacy. Once we knock that out of the water, these people are finished.
Oh, but Trump is our president, and what he says reflects negatively on us and reflects negatively on Haiti. And you have step siblings that are adopted from Haiti. Yeah, it's a shithole. That's why we adopted them.
You jerks! You took them out of a terrific country to bring them to this racist hellhole called America? Send their asses back there. Oh, why not? Why not? There's no difference. Would you rather live in Haiti or Norway? The fact that question even came up on CNN is ridiculous.
I didn't even.
Trump never called a white country a shithole. Obama never bombed a white country. What's worse, saying nigger or bombing a country? Literally, I asked people, this did not get the credence I thought it would, so I'm going to go at it again. What would be worse? If Trump in a speech tomorrow, what would get more press coverage? If Trump in a speech tomorrow said nigger, or if Trump killed civilians with bombs tomorrow? You don't even have to ask yourself. 100 times Trump has bombed and killed civilians and ended their lives, and the media still says, "Oh,
brown civilians."
Well, what he might have said about Mexicans, or the judge he said was Mexican. Yeah, well, the judge was an absolute idiot, so he's saying he might have a bias towards his in-group preference. They have no good arguments, and when you point out these obvious things to them, they just recoil, and that's why exposing the most dangerous superstitions is so important.
Yeah. Well, that's a good note to end on. That was, wow, what a nice little cherry on the top right there. Nice transition. There you go. So as we're closing here, Keith, why don't you plug your stuff for our audience?
My channel is Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone. I also have an account at archive.org. You can follow me on Twitter at @AN_capitalist. Please, all my videos, please download them, re-upload them under different names, different tags, whatever you do to spread the message. I don't care if I get the credit. I just want it to be heard. Thanks, Patrick, so much for your time.
Awesome. Always glad to talk to you, buddy. So for our audience, this was the Big 50, episode 50 of the Liberty Weekly podcast, even though there has been more episodes than 50. But the show notes for this one can be found at libertyweekly.net/50. Keith Knight's, what do you have? What's your short YouTube handle? Or I'll include a link for your YouTube page in the show notes.
Yeah, if you could just link to the page, I don't have a specifically designed one for my name.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll link to that. Make sure everyone that listens to Liberty Weekly podcast should definitely check out Keith Knight's Don't Tread on Anyone. So that's been episode 50, and I'm Patrick MacFarlane, signing out.